Okay, so I've got some sleep data here. This is the date of each night that I went to sleep and how much sleep I got per night there. First thing I want to do is check out the distribution of this sleep. I'm going to go to Insert, Chart, and I'm going to grab a histogram. I don't feel that this is really enough buckets there to help me see what's going on. So there we go. Seems like putting about 15 minutes in each bar gives me a place where I can kind of see the distribution going on here. Is it normally distributed? Yeah. It's not the best. We do have more in the middle here, a little bit less on the tails. Ideally, we'd like to see a little more normal distribution than that, but I'm going to live with this here, and I'm going to drag this off to the side. Next thing I want to do is create a line chart. So I'm going to highlight both columns A and B. Going to insert a chart, line chart. Looks like it's going to work, and I'm going to call this control chart for minutes of sleep per night. There we go. And I also want, if I click on series, I want to see a dot for every actual night of sleep. That lets me see it point by point a little better. So I'm just going to change my point size to 7, and here we can see each point represent a night of sleep. For example, there's July 29, 287 minutes of sleep, so a bit under 5 hours of sleep that night, apparently. Okay, so the control chart is nice to see these patterns, and maybe this is essentially a run chart right now. Might have a median line in there or something yet, but the control chart advantage is that it gives us a more precise understanding. So let me show how to create the control chart in this video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what it means in future videos. So essentially, next thing I need is I need a line going through here for the average. So I'm going to say average, and it bothers me that it's not centered in bold, so I'm going to click on the 1 here. I'm going to bold all of that and center all of that. And what I'm going to do here is take the average of the first, say, 20 data points, but I'm going to do something here that we've seen briefly before. If I don't freeze these cells, it's going to update and take the average of the most recent 20 cells. So I'm going to highlight those and press F4. You could manually put those $ in. That would be fine. And so this will give me the average of those first 20 points. And I can even click down. So every cell in this column is giving me the average of the first 20 points. Now, ideally, you want this average based on stable conditions, and I think I've read that maybe 100 points that are in control, like when your process is in control. In other words, my sleep, maybe before I start messing around with it, I could collect a wider set of data points here, but I'm just going to use the first 20 to determine my average, and I'm going to keep that average all the way throughout. Next thing I'm going to do is calculate the standard deviation, and I'm going to do it very similar. I'm going to do it of the population, because what I'm doing is creating a standard deviation of the population for these first 20 points. Whoops. And I want that to be stable, so I'm going to press that F4 button again to put in the $. And again, this just allows me to keep the same standard deviation in every case. So my average amount of sleep is 356 minutes per night with a standard deviation of 35.3. Now the control limits, the ones that are commonly used are the average minus 3, I'm just going to call sigma, maybe I'll just call it 3 standard deviation. And this is the, you know what, maybe I will go ahead and call this the upper control limit, just so it matches the charts that you'll see elsewhere. And then I have my lower control limit. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting a control limit that's 3 standard deviations above and 3 standard deviations below my average. If you look at a normal distribution chart, you can see this symbol right here represents mean, and these are sigma, these are standard deviations. So what I'm really doing is going out here 3 standard deviations above my mean, and down here 3 standard deviations subtracted from my mean or below my mean, because that range, if the data is normally distributed, should capture me virtually all of the data. And if data is going outside of that data, I'm starting to wonder if there's something special about this data, perhaps in a bad way special. So that upper control limit, just as it says right here, is the mean plus 3 standard deviations. So I'm just writing that mean, average, plus 3 times my standard deviation. That'll give me my upper control limit. And then I can copy that down. My lower control limit is right here, average minus 3 sigma, 3 standard deviations. It's going to be the same formula, except when I have my average, I'm going to subtract 3 times the standard deviation. And you might think, well, it's not very interesting that all these values are the same. That's exactly the point. On the control chart, we want all of these variables to be the same because they're going to create a horizontal line. If these points were constantly changing, these control limits would not be horizontal. And that's fine in certain charts, but for the most basic chart here, we're going to leave it like this. Next thing I'm going to do is put those lines on the chart. So how do I do that? If I go here where it says Add Series, I'm going to select a data range, and the first one I'm going to put in there is average. Okay, and notice now this average labeled in red appears through the center of my points. So I can see not only how much sleep I got per night, but I can at a glance see if I got below or above the average. For example, on July 24th, I got pretty much right at the average. It looks like I hit it a couple nights here. July 26th, I was a little below the average. Next thing I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and I want to add another series. Let me find where that, okay, so it had automatically gone to customize. All I needed to do was click back on setup, and here I can add another series. So I'm going to select, so I don't need to select standard deviation. I want to select my upper control limit. Notice it puts it right there. And I'm going to add one more series. This will be my lower control limit. And now I'm starting to get something that looks like a control chart. In order to better see that variance, I'd like to kind of zoom in with a magnifying glass on that, and luckily enough I can. If I go to Customize and drop down to my vertical axis here, so my y-axis, I have the option of doing a minimum and maximum value. So I'm just going to choose something here that's below any of my data points. And I think I'm going to be satisfied with that. Maximum, if I put it too much lower, then I'm going to lose my upper control limit. So I think I'm going to just let it go like that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is maybe make that upper and lower control limit. Let me see if I can polish that at all. Okay, so it turns out you can click on any given line if you do want to change the color. For example, if I wanted that to appear green so that both of my control limits were green, I could do that. I'll leave that as an optional thing here. And we could, maybe more importantly, change these to dashes if we want, just to remind us that those are suggested limits. Okay, now we're going to do a similar thing for 1 and 2 standard deviations below and above the average. That's going to help us in reading our charts. So how do I get that little sigma character right there? Well, if I just Google sigma character, that's not going to, right here, I can cut and paste that. So I say something like -1 sigma, and then +1 sigma, oops, plus, not equals. Okay, not sure why I had to go to that length, but if you ever need to do something as a text, you can always use that quotation mark. Same thing right here, we're going to do -2 sigma. And again, I'm just cutting and pasting from the clipboard. I just pulled it right there. That's a helpful technique that works out quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead and put that quote in this time. Okay, so we're saying 1 sigma below, 1 sigma above the mean, and 2 sigmas below. Go ahead and follow the same ideas that you did for these. Let me just do one of them real quick here. So 1 below would be the average minus 1 times this. And I'm going to do a similar thing for these 3. Okay, and just as we did before, we're going to add in the series for each of those. So we're just going to select like this, and so on. Go ahead and add in each of those. Okay, and then I'm going to click in and just make sure that each of these are dashed. Maybe I'll dash them all slightly differently here. Okay, so the 1 sigma are the tiny dots, 2 sigmas are the dot dash, and 3 sigmas are the longer dash. I have a nice key here to help me control all of them. And the other thing I might do is just expand this chart a little bit so that I can interpret and see basically where the points are at. That's going to be important as I look at them here. So there is your nice, beautiful control chart.